In the mainline series Pokemon games, we've always had a choice of 3 starter Pokemon, with 3 exceptions: Let's Go Eevee, Let's Go Pikachu, and Pokemon Yellow. But aside from those exceptions, we've always had the choice of a Fire, Water, and Grass type, and they've always been available to evolve twice. But what if that wasn't an option? What if we only had the options of Pokemon that evolve once? That's what I'm going to try and do in this video. I'm going to go through each of the regions and decide what their starter trio would be if they were Pokemon that could only evolve once. I'm going to decide that is a little complicated, so we'll try and run it down before we get too into it. Generally, I'm going to be aiming for Pokemon that have a base stat total spread of around 15. That's not hard and fast, it's just what I prefer. If I can keep it within that range, that'd be great, because that's what seems to be the range that we have currently. Second, I'm going to be trying to avoid overlaps of secondary types where possible. In some instances, there really isn't an option, and there's just a better option to do it, but further down the line, it's going to get a little tricky. And I'm going to be using the Pokemon which is the most limited in its type as the guideline for the rest of the group. So in certainly later regions, there is definitely going to be a restriction where there's only one of a particular type. So we have to use that as our baseline. Otherwise, we're just going to dive straight into it. So if you are interested in this video, give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more of this coming in the future. But for now, let's dive straight into Kanto, and the iconic trio of Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander needs a replacement. It's not the easiest thing in the world to replace, so here's a few options that we have to go through. For our fire types, we have Vulpix, Growlithe, and Ponyta. With our grass types, we have Paris, Execute, Tangela, and technically Hisuian Voltorb, but given that Hisuian Voltorb is a new introduction, we're not going to count it here, and given that Tangrowth didn't exist in Gen 1, we're just going to remove that as well. Then for our water types, we have Staryu, Slowpoke, Shelder, Magikarp, Kabuto, Omanyte, Goldeen, Krabby, Seal, Horsea, and Tentacool. That is a long list of water types, so we're going to use our grass and fire types to help build a baseline before we start things off, and then we can use that to help eliminate some of the options. Immediately looking at these 5 Pokemon, we've got a bit of a situation in terms of 2 of them. Paris and Ponyta have wildly vast evolution levels, which means that getting a Paris to a Parasect early on is great, but you're having to hang on to a Ponyta for a very long time, and it's not really good to have a 16 level split between evolutions. In addition, whilst Paris has got a base stat total that kind of fits in with Vulpix, Parasect is significantly weaker than all our fire and water options, so I think we have to eliminate Paris, leaving our grass starter as Execute. And because of that high evolution level, I think we have to eliminate Ponyta as well, so that gives us Vulpix and Growlithe to choose between. It's a really tough choice between Vulpix and Growlithe, and I don't really have a good way of breaking the tie, so let's go and have a look at the water type, and maybe that will help split things up. Of our options, I think only Shelder and Staryu really stand out, mostly because we already have stone evolutions, and if that's the game we're playing, it makes sense to have all 3 of them have stone evolutions. It's just something that the Professor's Age could give you at some point when you've reached a certain milestone. Maybe when you get to Lavender Town, you get the option to evolve your Pokemon. Shelder and Staryu are pretty comparable, and I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards Shelder, mostly because of Starmie's dual typing. Because it also gains the Psychic type when it evolves, that would be an overlap with Exeggutor, so I think Cloyster is probably going to be a better fit, and therefore Shelder is our water starter. With Shelder's base stats of 305, I think it probably makes more sense to go for Vulpix as our fire starter. Growlithe and Arcanine are stronger, but I think this just fits the group a little bit better. I kind of like the idea of Vulpix's tails being at the 6 and then spreading out into the 9, whereas Execute goes from being its 6 eggs into one tall tree, and Shelder goes from its little shell into a big spiky boy. And now we head to Johto, where we only had 100 extra Pokemon added in, and not many 2-stage lines, so our options are very limited in quite a few regards. For the water types, we've got Chinchou, Wooper, and Remoraid. Our fire types are Houndour and Slugma, and our grass type is Sunkern. Just Sunkern. Because of the weakness of Sunkern and Sunflora, we have to really downgrade the starters we're going to have, which is why we're not comparing starters across the generations. It's just going to be contained within their games. That's it. It doesn't give a whole lot of room to go with when Sunkern only has a base stat total of 180, so when we look at Houndour and Slugma, I have to go with Slugma, because Houndour is way too strong and Houndoom is insane in comparison. And it's a similar story for the water types. Remoraid and Chinchou are significantly stronger than Sunkern. Chinchou is almost twice as strong, which is nuts. Chinchou and Houndour would be perfect if we didn't have Sunkern and we had another grass type option, because their base stat totals are the same and they evolve at a reasonable level. But because they're just so much stronger, we have to downgrade it and pick Wooper as our water type starter, which is a real bummer. Although Wooper evolves into Quagsire at around level 20 and Sunkern is a Sunstone, which you can get around the 3rd gym, Slugma doesn't evolve until level 38, and that's a really long time to have a Slugma. Particularly in Johto, that is most of the game. So We might have to do some level tweaking on Slugma just to bring its evolution level down to maybe 25 would probably make it more reasonable, because it has the same base stat totals as Quagsire, so it doesn't really make sense for it to be that far of a distance. It isn't ideal, but our Johto starters are Sunkern, Slugma, and Wooper. Ugh. Over to Hoenn, and this is the start of the trend where we start to see some real limited options. We have loads of water types, a few grass types, and just one fire type. Our water type options are Wingull, Carvanha, Wailmer, Barboach, Corphish, Feebas, and Clamperl. Even though there's a split evolution, we're kind of just gonna go with it. For the grass types, we have Shroomish, Cacnea, and Lileep. And then fire is Numble. Just Numble.
Subscribe!
Here we go again.
I guess we're going with Numble then as our fire type starter, so that will give us our benchmark. Of the 3 grass type starters, Lileep is quite a bit stronger than Numble, so I'm going to eliminate that. And also, I wouldn't like the idea of using one fossil Pokemon and not using the other in some way. It wouldn't necessarily make sense to me. In terms of the base stat totals, Breloom has got the same base stats as Camerupt, and Cacturn is just a bit stronger, but Shroomish evolves into Breloom a little bit earlier, at level 23, and it kind of makes sense for them to have a similar level of evolution. So Cacnea evolving at 32 to Numble's 33 feels about right, so I think those two would work quite well. Plus, they've got a nice little simpatico element of being from the desert. We can afford to go into a little bit more depth and the water types, because we have fewer options than we did in Kanto, and we'll address something with Feebas that we weren't able to do with Magikarp. Feebas is not a good starter choice. It is horrifically weak by design, but it is still far too weak to be used as a starter. Magikarp had the same problem, but because we were doing Waterstone evolutions, didn't need to worry about it. It was fine. Clamperl is a potential option, but having a trade item evolution is not ideal. I know we can change the evolution methods, we've done it before, and it is a thing in the Legends Arceus games, but I don't really want to do it if I can avoid it, so we'll discount Clamperl. Wailmer and Wailord are significantly stronger and have a much higher evolution level, so they're out. Whereas Wingull and Pelipper are a little bit weaker, and also the level 25 evolution means it's probably just below the level cap that I would like. That leaves us with Carvanha, Barboach, and Corphish. Now, whilst Carvanha and Corphish have the exact base stat totals that we're looking for and the right evolution levels, it feels like it would be silly to introduce 2 dark types as the starters, so I think we need to eliminate those outright. That leaves us with Barboach as our water starter, and actually, Barboach and Whiscash with the water ground typing is fantastic for going through Hoenn. Mudkip is by far the best starter throughout Hoenn, so having those 2 in place, pretty good going. That's a pretty decent substitution in my book. Hi. You may have noticed, like I just have whilst editing this, that I've included 2 ground types because I spent so much time trying to avoid the water and grass dark overlap, I completely ignored the fact that Camerupt is a ground type. Oops. So I kind of need to go back to the drawing board on this one, because whilst I could do some other alternatives, they're not ideal. The ground typing actually gives us a bit of an issue because it gives both of the Pokemon that it involved, in this case Whiscash and Camerupt, a ×4 weakness to another Pokemon within this starter trio, which is not ideal. By switching Wingull and Pelipper instead, that gives us a flying typing, which is not great for the grass type because it's now going in the other direction. The triangle doesn't quite work that way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give Carvanha the water starter spot. The reason for this is because you've got Archie and Maxie both have a Camerupt or a Sharpedo as their ace, which means you're going to have that overlap anyway. It makes sense to try and include both of them. There isn't a grass alternative, so I think probably better off going back to Breloom. Going to Shroomish as the grass starter is a bit of an issue because of the evolution level, but the base stat total is the same for all 3 of them. If you discount the fact that you've got a Mega for Camerupt and for Sharpedo, if you just gave one to Breloom, I think this trio would work quite well. You do have a fighting type strength, which is pretty good against Sharpedo, but I think you can probably get around it with some of these more powerful fire type moves from Camerupt. So in the revised list, Shroomish, Numble, and Carvanha are our starters for Hoenn. Okay, back to past me. I don't think you'll have to see me again. Editor me. The rest of me keep going on, and subscribe if you haven't already. Next is Sinnoh, and this one's this could upset the comments. For our grass types, we have Cherubi and Snova. The water types are Shellos, Finneon, and Buizel as our options, and there's no fire type at all. There are just no fire types in Sinnoh. There's Chimchar, and Ponyta, and then Heatran, and Magmortar, and none of those work for this. We're going to try and keep it within the deck, so there's no point in using Ponyta. So I have an alternative, but we're going to go through the other ones first, just so we know what we're aiming for. The grass and water types, there's a bit of balance that needs to be done. Overall, their base forms, their base stat totals are around the same, except for Cherubi, who is significantly weaker, as is its evolved form in Cherub. So I think we need to eliminate Cherubi, leaving Sinnoh as our only grass choice. This gives us a bit of an issue with our water types, because none of them evolve quite as late, the latest being level 31, and whilst Floatzel has got the same base stats as Abomasnow, or close enough, Weasel evolves significantly earlier, so I think we kind of need to eliminate Weasel and Floatzel for that. That leaves us with Shellos and Finneon as our two water choices. And of the two, I'm leaning more towards Shellos. Although there is a 10 level difference between when Shellos and Sinnoh would evolve, I think having a stronger Abomasnow is fine for having that slightly later evolution level. And that leaves us with the troublesome fire type. And here's the rogue choice. Stunky. Now I know, Stunky is not a fire type, it is poison dark type. But it kind of works well within this trio. Its poison typing is super effective against Sinnoh and Abomasnow, and it makes it weak against the ground type moves of Gastrodon and Shellos. Its base stat total is 479, which sort of fits in between Gastrodon and Abomasnow, and it evolves at level 34, which is also pretty nice. Plus, on evolution, Stuntank learns Flamethrower for some reason. We're not entirely certain what this is. I don't know whether it's because it's a joke about lighting its gases from its rear end. So this is just going to be one of those weird regions where things don't quite line up the way that we want them to, but Sinnoh, Stunky, and Shellos, triple S's, nice, is going to be our starters for Sinnoh. Now to Unova, and there is a very obvious answer for this one, which is the elemental monkeys, Pansear, Pansage, and Panpour. But I don't want to do that, because although they all have the same base stat total and the same evolution method, that's kind of boring. And I want to make this a little bit more interesting, so we can have that as the safe option. We're going to put the monkeys in a box. We're not going to worry about those. We're going to come back and we're going to pick some other options. On our grass types, we have Cottony, Petlil, Deerling, Fungoose, and Ferroseed. The fire types, we have Darumaka and Larvesta. And for the water types, Tirtuga, Ducklet, and Frillish. And immediately we're going to do some elimination on the fire side and set ourselves out with our fire type starter. Larvesta evolves at level 59, and that's pretty much near the end of the playthrough, so we're yeeting Larvesta out of here. Sorry, we're just going to have Darumaka as our fire type starter. With that set as our benchmark, we're going to have a look at our grass types. Cottony and Petlil are both version exclusives and they're kind of interchangeable, but this might just rule them out instead. Whilst it's nice to have them both there, they're so identical. They both evolve with the Sunstone, they both have the same stat totals. It's hard to separate them, so I'm going to eliminate them just for simplicity's sake. That leaves us with Deerling, Ferroseed, and Fungus. Fungus and Amoongus have too high an evolution level and too low a base stat total to even be considered within Darumaka and Darumanitan, so they're gone. Ferroseed could work, but I think its evolution level is just a little bit too high, and whilst the steel typing would help make up for that, I think Deerling is actually going to work out quite nicely in here. It evolves at level 34, and Swordsbook has 475 as its base stats, which is pretty close to Darmanitan's 480, so I feel pretty comfortable putting those two as a equal fitting as a starter choice. For the water types, we're going to eliminate Tirtuga because we've said before about having fossils involved, and it just makes it a little bit too messy, so Ducklet and Frillish are our two options. Frillish is a pretty good option. Its base stat totals are around the same as the other two, and it fits in nicely in that trio, but it just evolves a little bit later. Ducklet, though, is not without its problems. By having that flying type, Ducklet is now neutrally defensive against the grass type moves of Swordsbuck. This means that Swordsbuck can't really do a huge amount against Ducklet and Swanna. Add in the fact that Ducklet can learn Wing Attack and Aerial Ace at levels 9 and 15 respectively, and you've got a pretty powerful counter. Therefore, despite the evolution level being a little bit higher, I'm going to give it to Frillish. The 5 level difference in evolution levels isn't great, but the Pokemon are pretty comparable in all other regards, so I'm going to let it slide and keep these three as our starters. Over to France and Kalos, where we have limited options again. Litleo is our only fire type, so we're going to be using that as our benchmark to choose for the others. For grass types, we have Skidoo, Phantom, and Pumpkaboo, and for the water types, we have Binnacle and Clauncher. Phantom and Pumpkaboo could be good starters, but they're both trade evolutions, and when I can make it a little easier on myself, I can just eliminate that, so we're going to go for Skidoo as our grass type. Base stat totals work pretty nicely anyway, because Litleo is pretty strong, and Go-Goat is around the same level as Pyroar anyway, so I feel like these two would work quite nicely. For our water types, they both have really high evolution levels, with Binnacle having a level 39 and Clauncher at level 37. Which is not ideal. It's the only options we have, so we're just going to have to go with it. There isn't really a tie break in the base stat totals either, because both Barbaracle and Chloritza have got 500, which means we're looking more towards Binnacle and Clauncher, and of the two, I'm feeling more Clauncher. There seems to be a bunch of animals as our starters in Kalos, so I feel like Clauncher fits in better within that theme. Its base stat total is not as low as Binnacle's, and it just kind of fits. The evolution level is higher, but it's not as high. 37's okay, it's within 5 of Skidoo, but Litleo has got a much lower evolution level anyway, because reasons, as far as I can work out, so not perfect, but it's what we've got. To Alola, and more limited options. Salandit is our only fire-type option, so that's going to be our baseline. It does have the limitation of only evolving if it's female, but we're just going to give you a female. It's fine, we can do that. It's easy enough.
Yeah, squeeze.
For our grass types, we have Fomantis and Morilol, and our water types, we have Mareanie, Dewpider, and Wimpod. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, I completely forgot that Shiinotic existed. I'm not going to have this as a starter, because it is just so forgettable as a grass mushroom thing. Lurantis actually has exactly the same base stat total as Salazzle, and that matters slightly more to me. Shiinotic has a much lower base stat total, and its level of evolution is a lot lower than Salazzle and Lurantis anyway, so I feel like Fomantis fits in better within this trio. Then for our water types of Mareanie, Dewpider, and Wimpod, I feel like we have to eliminate Mareanie and Toxapex, because we already have the poison types of Salazzle and Salandit. Then of the two remaining, it's a tough one. Wimpod is much weaker than Fomantis and Salandit, whereas Dewpider is also weaker, but not as far off. And while Glycopod is a lot stronger and would be a very worthwhile reward of having that weaker starter, Araquanid is not too far off itself, and it has a lower evolution level, which I think would counterbalance the weakness of Dewpider a lot better. Plus, I also don't really want to use Glycopod because it's the signature Pokemon of Guzma, and I think it would be weird to use a signature Pokemon of the villain as your starter. It would mean you have to change the whole story, and that's not what we're doing in this video. But that gives us our starters of Fomantis, Salandit, and Dewpider. It's, again, not perfect, but it's what we're going with as our best options. To Galar we go, and another small pool of options. Sizzlipede is our only fire-type option, so that gives us our benchmark. Then we've got Gossifleur and Applin as our grass types, and Chewtle and Arrokuda as our water types. Neither of our two grass types really fits in well with Sizzlipede. They're both quite a bit weaker, but I feel like Applin is a better choice because it has that dragon typing. It just means it will survive hits a little bit better, it's a bit more defensive, and whilst it does have that split evolution, you could just have Harpal the Professor provide you with the apple that you need. For the water types, Chewtle and Arrokuda are both pretty close. There's a slight swing in the stat totals when they evolve, but I'm gonna give it to Chewtle. Chewtle has a slightly better evolution level. It doesn't fit exactly with Centiskorch, but I think the big thing here is a factor that I haven't really discussed before. This is about the signature gimmick of the region. All three of the Pokemon that we've decided on, Applin, Chewtle, and Sizzlipede, have got the Gigantamax factor, which means that Appleton, Flapple, Centiskorch, and Dreadnought can go into their Gigantamax forms. Whilst it would be cool if Barraskewda fit in better, I think having 2 of the 3 that had G-Max forms and then the other one didn't would not be as fun, and it means that the water type starter wasn't picked as often. I prefer that kind of balance, so overall, I'm going to go with this, although Barracuda would be better if G-Max didn't exist. Finally, we get to the Paldea region, and this is going to be a mess. Our fire-type options are once again limited to just one, Charcadet, then our grass types are Bramblin, Toedscool, and Capsakid, and our water types are Wiglet and Finizen. The split evolution of Charcadet can be dealt with by just giving you the item as you go through, so I feel like it's not the worst thing in the world to have this split evolution line. For the grass types, we gotta eliminate Capsakid. Having a grass fire type is cool, but having the type overlap with Charcadet just feels like it's a bad option to have. That leaves us with Bramblin and Toedscool. Bramblin has quite good base stats in comparison to Charcadet, and Toedscool is quite a lot higher, but on the evolution, Toedscruel drops below Armarouge and Ceruledge, and Brambleghast is way lower. Plus, we have to put in the fact that Brambleghast has got a weird evolution method, that 1,000 steps thing, and Toedscool just evolves at level 30, so I feel like Toedscool is a little bit better as a starter option. Looking at the water types, Wiglet and Finizen are not great options. Wiglet's actually not that much weaker than Charcadet, but Finizen fits in closer to Toedscool. Then when they evolve, Wugtrio is woeful, and Palafin can be broken, depending on which form it's in. In its Zero form, it has a base stat of 457, and in its Hero form, it's 650, which is obscene. So we're going to average those out to 553 for now. Its evolution level is also pretty weird. You have to be in the Union Circle and be at level 38. Having your starter have such a weird and difficult evolution method, particularly if you don't have friends to make a Union Circle with, particularly if the games just stop supporting that feature at a later point, is probably not great. So we probably would just need to change that evolution method to, I don't know, something like use Helping Hand a number of times, or just straight up level evolution. And with it being level 38, I feel like having the slightly higher base stat total in its hero form, after you've had to switch it out anyway, it kind of makes sense for it to balance out. It's not the most ideal thing in the world, but it kind of fits in with this trio of Toedscool, Charcadet, and Finizen. So that's it. That's our choices if we had starters that only evolved once. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree with any of the choices, if there are any Pokemon you would have rather seen, and particularly whether or not you think Stuntank probably fits in here as well. I didn't have a choice, okay? I could have picked something else, but I didn't have a fire type. I could have picked Ponyta, but it didn't really work as nicely as I would have liked, so Stunky and Sinnoh is fine. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, thanks everyone. Bye!